In 2022, nearly half of Americans expected a civil war in the next few years. 1 in 5 now believes political violence is justified, and it's not just the US but around the world. People increasingly see themselves as part of opposing teams. There are many different reasons for this, but one gets blamed a lot: social media. Social media divides us, makes us more extreme and less empathetic. It riles us up or sucks us into doom scrolling, making us stressed and depressed. It feels like we need to touch grass and escape to the real world. New research shows that we might have largely misinterpreted why this is the case. It turns out that the social media internet may uniquely undermine the way our brains work, but not in the way you think. The myth of the filter bubble. You've probably heard about online filter bubbles. Algorithms give you exactly what you want, or what they think you want. You only see information that shows you opinions that agree with yours, while dissenting opinions or information are filtered out. Since you only see content close to your worldview, more extreme and toxic opinions suddenly seem less extreme. You are trapped in a radicalizing filter bubble, and your view of the world becomes narrower and more extreme. But is that true? Extreme filter bubbles seem to be rather rare. Studies that investigated what people actually look at online or are shown by search engines found little evidence that you are ideologically isolated. It is the exact opposite. Online you are constantly confronted with opinions and worldviews that are not your own. It turns out the place where you are the most ideologically isolated is your real life, in the real world, with real people. Your real-world interactions with your friends, family, colleagues and neighbors are much less diverse than your online bubble. The filter bubble exists in your real life, not online. Okay, wait. Online filter bubbles have been the prevailing explanation as to why we've all started hating each other more over the last 2 decades. If that's not the case, shouldn't the internet open our minds and make us more empathetic with each other? Unfortunately, your brain is stupid. Your brain is stupid. Human brains didn't evolve to understand the true nature of reality, but to navigate and maintain social structures. Our ancestors desperately needed each other to survive, so our brains had to make sure we cooperated. That's why social isolation or exclusion feels so horrible, because it was actually life-threatening. A tribe that worked together survived. A divided tribe died. The way communities worked for thousands of years is that, sure, you may have disliked a neighbor, but because you lived close to each other, you also rooted for the same sports club or saw them at the church. You both thought that the people from the other village were idiots. Being physically close made you familiar and created similarities that bridged the gap of different worldviews, so you didn't murder each other. And our worldviews were probably never that different to begin with, because they were shaped by the same local cultures. When our brains evolved, this was enough. The people around us tended to be similar to us. We naturally gravitated toward those similarities, which helped keep us aligned enough to work together despite occasional differences. As humanity grew from small tribes into towns, cities, kingdoms, and nations, our brains and communities had to adjust to increasingly diverse groups of people. We started meeting in town squares or universities, where debates and disagreements became part of public life. Yet even then, most communities remained relatively isolated and culturally homogeneous, and people generally aligned with those around them. Conflict and disagreement themselves aren't inherently bad. Debates about how we should live can drive progress and innovation. Our values, norms, and taboos are constantly evolving, and what seems normal today might be outdated tomorrow. But for societies to function, we also need a kind of social glue, something to hold us together. Our brains, however, are not concerned with global unity. They are still wired to seek safety within a tribe. Roughly 20 years ago, we entered a new phase that hit our brains like a freight train. The social media internet, the new digital town square. Our brains are not equipped to handle the scale and intensity of disagreement we face on social media. The very mechanisms that once allowed our ancestors to cooperate are now being derailed in unexpected ways. Whether we wanted to or not, our brains instinctively sort people by their views and opinions into groups. This process goes beyond simple tribalism. Researchers call it social sorting. Online, we encounter people with vastly different perspectives, but unlike a neighbor with whom we share a local sports team or community events, these strangers have no shared context with us. The absence of that local social glue makes it much harder for our brains to relate. Instead, disagreement becomes central to how we define them. Once that happens, we become less likely to seriously consider their positions or opinions. And when we hear negative information about them, our brains are more prone to believe it without much scrutiny. Conversely, When we find people online who share our worldview, who may even seem more aligned with us than many people in our offline lives, why our brains respond with strong approval. People who think like us must be good people, because we see ourselves and our groups as good, so we're more likely to accept their opinions and dismiss any criticism of them just as uncritically. Social media platforms, driven by engagement, make all of this worse. Their goal is to keep us online as long as possible, and one of the most effective ways to do that is by fueling anger. The angrier we become, the more likely we are to comment, share, and engage. This encourages platforms to amplify the most extreme and controversial opinions. It doesn't just show us disagreement, it shows us the most polarizing, divisive forms of it. Because our brains are constantly sorting people into teams, we start to lump the worst opinions we see online onto everyone we perceive as being on the opposing side. What's especially striking is how online polarization condenses every aspect of our identity, our lifestyle choices, the shows we watch, our sense of humor, religion, fashion into simplified, mutually exclusive teams. This flattens complex disagreements about society into a battle between sides that often appear to be deliberately making the world worse. People on the other side seem almost evil beyond reasoning or civil discussion. And yet, from their perspective, we may appear exactly the same. On a societal level, this process dissolves the social glue that holds democracies together. If we start believing that our neighbors are evil, how can we coexist? This is especially severe in countries like the United States, where a two-party political system makes it even easier to think in terms of us versus them. Negative perceptions of the opposing party have reached record highs. So what can we do? Is there a way forward? At the very least, we can become aware of how social media affects our minds. It's easier to change ourselves than to change the world. We can question our own beliefs, reflect on why we believe what we do, and consider whether we accept or reject information simply because of who is saying it. The internet brings both incredible opportunities and serious challenges, but just as we've adapted to great changes in the past, we can also learn to navigate this one. Would you like me to polish it even more depending on your goal? For example, more dramatic for a video script, more neutral for an essay, more conversational for a talk, or YouTube more punchy for a short article. Just as we had to adapt from living in small tribes to settling in cities, we now have to adapt to the information age, where billions of people are just a click away. Evolution works too slowly to keep up, so we need models that fit what our brains can handle. One model that seemed to work reasonably well was the pre-media internet, something older internet users might remember. Bulletin boards, forums, and blogs. The key differences back then were simple. First, there were no algorithms desperately fighting to keep you online at any cost. At some point, you simply logged off and went about your day. A strange thought now. More importantly, the old internet was fractured into thousands of distinct communities, each like its own small village formed around shared interests or beliefs. These digital villages were separated by virtual rivers and mountains, keeping each community somewhat isolated. This setup mirrored real life far more closely than modern social media. Each community had its own unique culture and set of rules. One forum might embrace rough humor and light moderation, while another enforced strict guidelines and quickly banned rule breakers. If you didn't like how a village was run, you could leave and find a different one that suited you better, instead of cramming everyone into one enormous town square that overwhelms our brains and pushes us toward conflict. Perhaps the solution lies in returning to smaller, more contained online communities, because, although our brains struggle to see it, we are actually all on the same team, humanity, clinging to a small rock speeding through an indifferent universe. We're in this together. But until our minds fully adjust to the overwhelming scale of the digital age, a bit of separation might help us cope. One of the major problems with modern media is that most news outlets tend to cater to one side, making you feel like you're always on the correct team. Ground News, the sponsor of this video, tries to make these biases more transparent by offering tools that help you critically evaluate the information you consume, a mission we fully support. Ground News collects related articles from around the world so you can compare how different outlets report the same stories. They also provide context on each source's political leanings, ownership, and reporting reliability, helping you get a clearer, less stressful view of what's really happening. If you want to check them out, go to ground.news. Signing up through this link gets you 30% off their unlimited access plan. Your subscription helps support both Ground News and Kurzgesagt. In creating more media literacy tools, this mission also has a personal backstory. In 2018, Philip, the founder of Kurzgesagt and the writer of this video, was undergoing chemotherapy. Bored and looking for distraction, he read every major German newspaper every single day, even those he disliked. What stood out beyond the obvious biases were the stories that each side simply didn't report. Every outlet ignored topics inconvenient to its own worldview. The Ground News blind spot feed addresses this exact issue, showing you which stories